Thank you for listening to the BjjBrick Podcast. We'll be bringing you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and good times. We hope to flatten your Jiu-Jitsu learning curve, help you get the most out of your grappling ability, and meet your goals both on and off the mat.
Welcome back, my friends, to the BjjBrick Podcast. This is episode 273. It is our extra episode of the month. I'm here with my good friends, Gary and Byron. Guys, I noticed when I was up at Wichita that some people were calling Byron Chip, and I don't know how he gets that nickname. And then I heard someone calling you Dell. Gary, how come people call you guys Chip and Dell?
Well, I think it has a little bit to do with our part-time job. Byron and I, we both like to dance. We both like to make a little bit of money on the side, and we both have a fondness for leather pants.
Yeah, he says a little bit of money. Very little money is what we're able to make.
Little is the key word.
Multiple categories.
More than one way.
Yeah. I'm excited for this episode. Let's dance on over to the next part of the show. So what's up with this extra episode? If somebody's new and they were listening every week, why is there an extra episode this week?
Because it's fun.
Yes.
Actually, yeah, we just want to offer the listeners as much as we can. And since it's fun. And since we added a third member to the team, and Byron was nice enough to get me some recording gear, I get the opportunity to do an interview, and we just add an extra episode, do a few things differently. For instance, we'll start right out of the gate. We do a tip of the month instead of discussing an article. And this week's tip of the month is actually inspired by the last episode that we recorded. And the tip is learn how to explain your why about BJJ to other people. And I think, Byron, you came up with this, and I think you were thinking that this would help encourage other people to join Jiu-Jitsu. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. I realized that if you guys do this better than I do. If somebody I don't know asks me about Jiu-Jitsu, I tell them what it's about, and I kind of gauge their interest and go from there. But you guys will tell them what it's about, and then you tell them what it's done for you so far. And I think that's a much better sales technique. If you're trying to sell Jiu-Jitsu to somebody who's kind of curious about it or just even asking about it, it's important to do that in a strong manner. And I saw Gary do that just a few days ago. We were training, and we happened to be working with some a small group of people who had no idea really what Jiu-Jitsu was about. And they started asking questions, and Gary and I started helping them. And then Gary, he starts talking about how much Jiu-Jitsu has helped him on the mat, off the mat, and how much, it's changed his life. And I'm like, here he goes again. He's explaining his why about Jiu-Jitsu. So sure, maybe these individuals are impressed with the Jiu-Jitsu that they saw today. Maybe they thought it was really cool. Maybe, they really could care less. Okay, that was different. But the way Gary is telling it, they all left that day knowing that it means a lot more than just learning how to choke somebody to Gary. And I undersell Jiu-Jitsu all the time when I talk about other people. So I need to kind of almost come up with a story about, I guess it's a tip for me, about how Jiu-Jitsu has helped me so far. And I need to keep that in my back pocket. So when somebody asks me about Jiu-Jitsu, I tell them a little bit about Jiu-Jitsu, and then I hit them with the story about, it's helped me find my job as a fighter. I got to talk to people and kind of connect socially, and then they connect me with the right people and help me get along the process of becoming a firefighter. That was a big change in my life, and I can talk about how it's helped me stay relatively fit for somebody who doesn't really care a ton about fitness. I do jiu-jitsu because it's fun and it's exciting, and just the fact that I happen to exercise is just an extra bonus for me. And so I need to be able to talk about these things and sell it better. I think everybody should do that. You should all just be able to talk to a random stranger or a random friend that doesn't know jiu-jitsu and be able to sell it better. And you'll have more of your off-the-mat friends convert to the jiu-jitsu life if you could do this, I think.
And basically, that's what we're trying to do. We want more people to train jiu-jitsu, and by, the passion, by our enthusiasm, by telling our story, our why, hopefully we can get more people in there. Byron, you were talking real quick about having a story to put in your back pocket. But with those leather pants we wear, we really don't have back pockets. I just wanted to let you know that.
That's true. It just messes up everything. You want that smooth back.
Yeah. But, you know, one time, one person who really affected me, you know, was talking about his why in jiu-jitsu. And really it wasn't, you know, he didn't say, hey, I'm going to talk about my why, but he was just talking about jiu-jitsu. I did a seminar with Justin Rader. And Justin Rader, I have never met a guy who had so much passion, so much enthusiasm in his voice. If jiu-jitsu were cars and he was a car salesman, I would have bought 15 cars from him right there at that point. And you know what it is? It's, you know, when you're vested into it, when it has really done something for you. For me, it's just, you know, self-confidence. It has made my life better. It has made me realize that anything I do at work, no matter what task I'm given at work, you know, that 20 years ago would have seemed impossible to do. Now I just look at it, hey, man, this is nothing. This is, you know, a lot easier than being under Byron or Joe's side mount. This is much easier than when, you know, Joe's got an arm bar locked on me and I can't get out. I would rather tackle this task. I've been put in so many pressure situations that everything's easy now. It has really changed my life, and hasn't changed my life, you know, to make me a tougher person, which, you know, it has, but that's not my why. My why is just, it's made me happy. It's lowered my stress level. It's made me healthier, as Byron says. And on top of that, I've met so many new people, you know, in this sport who are always there at a drop of a hat. It doesn't matter, you know, what's going on. You know, these guys will do anything for me. And I know we talked about this just in our last episode with Joe's buddies, you know, man, Joe, I forgot his name again.
Man, we give Javier a shout out every episode these days. I'm going to have to hit him up. For
Javier, I haven't really forgot. I'm just trying to get your name out there in your company again. But, you know, just stuff like that. And everybody I know jiu-jitsu has basically said the same thing. And, you know, I can talk about jiu-jitsu all day. And like Byron was talking about the other night, I just when you start asking me about what jiu-jitsu's done, instead of asking me about moves or anything else, that's when I really get going. So, you know, to be honest, I love jiu-jitsu. And my name's Gary.
That's good stuff, guys.
Yeah, I just think if you think about how you're going to say it, you'll be able to do that anytime. And I compare it to like a job interview. If you go into an interview, yeah, I'll just go in there and do my best and wing it. You might get the job, but if you like practice for that, how am I going to talk about my last employer? How am I going to talk about a difficult situation? They're going to ask why I'm leaving, or maybe they'll ask about how I've had an absence of work for a certain amount of time, or my school experience. If you kind of game plan the things you want to highlight, you'll do a lot better. And it doesn't take a lot of work, but you sort of sound a lot better during the interview. Same thing as someone's asking about jiu-jitsu. Kind of game plan how you would share some of your stories about jiu-jitsu with somebody, and they're going to go, you're going to be, you know, a much better salesperson of jiu-jitsu. And I think that's a good thing to be to your friends, because you owe it to them to give them the best chance they have to check it out.
You know, there's one more benefit to being able to explain your why. The more you understand about why you do jiu-jitsu and what you get out of it, the easier it is to get through the difficult times. Because let's face it, there are times when jiu-jitsu is tough, and there's times I think where everybody has in the back of their mind the question of whether it's worth continuing. And if you have good reasons why you're doing it, that'll help you go during those times.
Joe, that actually may be one of the best points I've ever heard. And I do hear people say all the time, is like, why am I doing this? You know, my neck's hurting. I just hurt my knee. You know, it's affecting my job. It's affecting my relationships. But if you really know, like, your why, kind of like what you said there, Joe, it makes it all worthwhile, because there are going to be ups and downs. It's never going to be a great path. But if there was a great path and it was easy, I don't think I'd want to do it. I like the challenges. I like the valleys. I like trying to figure out how to get past, you know, step one. You know, we're never going to get better unless we figure out how to go from one spot to another spot to another spot. And jiu-jitsu is like a big mental game. You know, there's so many challenges that are put in front of us that we can't just beat these challenges with our physicality. We can't just push this wall down. Jiu-jitsu is so great. When I first started, I just wanted to hit everything head on and just run right through that wall. And I realized that's not a very smart way to go. And that's how I was in my personal life too, in my work life. You gave me a task. I just jumped right into it and just figured out how to break right through that. And it never worked. I just kept running into that wall and coming back with a headache. And, never doing as well as I could. Jiu-Jitsu has taught me, hey, let's think outside the box. Jiu-Jitsu is not in a box. Jiu-Jitsu isn't just step 1, step 2, step 3, even though I did say we're going to go from different steps. We got to figure out how to get there. I mean, one person may get there with a berimbolo. Another person may get there with a knee slide pass. There's so many different ways we can do that. And then we take all this stuff we learn on the mat, the way our mind thinks. We've learned from Daniel Coyle about how our mind works, the myelin and everything going in between there. We learn all that stuff. We learn it on the mats, but we can take it to our relationships in life. We can take it to our workplace, and it just makes us that much better individuals.
Yeah, Gary, you make a lot of great points, and somebody's listening to this, and they're thinking, man, I got to try this jiu-jitsu thing. Boy, have we got the thing for you. We have an audiobook.
By the way, none of us have ever trained jiu-jitsu. We just do this podcast.
Yes. We do have an audiobook called Your First Year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's about 2.5 hours long, and it is literally kind of like a longer podcast aimed at one topic. It's just me talking to you, and I go through different things I think are very important for you to know. One of the more lengthy chapters is Chapter 4, Techniques and Positions to Focus On. I think this is a challenging one for a lot of people in a lot of schools because not all schools have beginner classes, intermediate classes. And without that, you get thrown into the mix of everybody else, and it's hard to figure out, okay, today we're working on this kind of a complicated De La Riva sweep. Is this something I'm going to be able to pull off in reality? Or what can I actually glean from this lesson of jiu-jitsu today besides it's confusing? And to have some sort of a focus and maybe even learn something as the person that's, learn about your balance on the top position possibly, or maybe just learn part of the setup of the sweep, or maybe the basics behind the De La Riva. But most of us don't get beginner classes where you really learn those fundamentals in an organized manner. We're thrown into the big class and we don't know what to focus on. I think that is definitely a source of frustration for a lot of students. And to think that chapter in this audiobook, Your First Year of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is really going to help you identify things you should be working on and then even how to do that. So check it out if you're fairly new to jiu-jitsu. It's $11.99. The money goes and helps support the show. And there'll be a link to it in the show notes, of course.
Okay, guys, that brings us to the episode, or to the interview for this episode. We have Kimberly Kaye. Kimberly's a blue belt out of NOLA BjjBrick. She's also a contributing author for Jiu-Jitsu Times. Kimberly has been a victim of sexual assault. She's been mugged, and she has a disease that basically attacks her own body. And through all of this, man, she has a great attitude. I was inspired and humbled after interviewing her. So let's welcome to the show Kimberly Kaye. You'll notice towards the end of the interview, we discussed some of the articles that she wrote, and one of them was about a guest that we recently had on, Evan Robinson. And I don't know if we really called him out by name when we were talking about that article, so I wanted to throw the name out there. If you're just dropping by and you haven't listened to every episode and you missed that one, it's episode 270. Go back and check it out. Welcome to the show, Kimberly Kaye.
He is the most interesting grappler in the world.
He is so good at getting hooks in that he won the 2012 Bassmaster Classic without using a rod or a reel. He washes his belt, yet somehow it retains all the knowledge he has gained. He attended a women's-only seminar, and his only disguise was his charm. It took 2 hours for someone to notice his beard.
I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I prefer the BjjBrick Podcast. Stay sweaty, my friends.
BjjBrick listeners, I'd like to welcome Kimberly Kaye to the podcast. Kimberly Kaye is a blue belt training out of New Orleans. She trains at NOLA MMA. Kimberly, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Before we get started, tell us a little bit about the gym there that you train at, who you're training with, and what's going on there.
Oh, sure. So I train out at NOLA MMA dominantly because it's my husband's gym and location. But here in New Orleans, we've got like a 3-gym umbrella that's NOLA BjjBrick. NOLA BjjBrick is Swiss black belt Mateus school that he started down here, and it just grew and grew and grew into 3 different gyms. So NOLA MMA is affiliated with NOLA BjjBrick. But it's, one of those places where you can play chokey, passy, but also punchy, kicky also. So we have a good mix in NOLA MMA.
Awesome. What kind of mix are you doing right now? How much jiu-jitsu are you doing? How much Muay Thai are you doing?
I'm doing a pretty good mix right now. I'm still sort of rehabbing my body after, a long time not being able to train. So it's, some days it's like, oh, okay, 30 minutes of jiu-jitsu and like 30 minutes of yoga, like you see where your body's at and then kind of go, okay, I should probably scale back if I want to train more times this week. But typically I get about like a day or 2 of jiu-jitsu in right now and a day or 2 of Muay Thai. And then if I'm feeling well and my recovery is going well, I'll just double up on each. But yeah, it's about 50-50 right now.
Okay, that's a good mix. And
yeah.
You mentioned that health issues kind of limit your training a little bit, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. Is we love inspirational stories. We love stories about conquering and overcoming and courage. And you do have some health issues. Can you take a minute to tell us about that?
I do have some health issues. I am a genetic freak, like literally when, people say, oh, you're such a freak or you're such a weirdo. I'm like, yes, thank you. I feel so validated and recognized. I have a weird genetic disorder. I have a couple genetic abnormalities that just do weird things inside my body. So I have a condition called CIPO, which is chronic intestinal pseudo-obstruction. And like, for reference on how weird I am, like 1 in 9 million people, are born with CIPO or a predisposition to get CIPO. And basically it's digestive paralysis. Your intestines and your gut are a bunch of muscles and nerves that all talk to each other to help move food through and help you turn food into energy and feed your cells. And at some point, my nerves and muscles started to not talk to each other. Their cell communication is very weak. So there are periods of time where my digestive system just doesn't work. The muscles and nerves that should make them contract to push food through don't. And so, it's problematic when you can't eat or absorb nutrients the right way. But CIPO is actually like a side effect of a larger genetic condition I have. And it's basically an abnormality of connective tissue, like the collagen in my body, stuff that makes up my intestines, stuff that makes up my ligaments, my tendons, all that. It's just a little bit off, and it's more prone to breaking, and it communicates with other systems differently. When you have a genetic disorder, you learn exactly how much your body is completely interconnected. So, something can go wrong in my foot, and I can feel it in the nervous system, like in my chest, and you're like, well, that's new. That's weird. But I was born with it, and we weren't totally aware that I had it until my mid-20s or 30s, when my health really started to just go downhill fast. And it did it in that sort of chronic illness, ambivalent way that is very confusing for most doctors. American doctors in Western medicine, they're really great at specialties. They're fantastic at surgery. We're so good at surgery in this country, it's unbelievable. But as far as looking at like a systemic problem, we're kind of not great at that. We have doctors that they look at your heart, and someone else looks at your stomach, and someone else looks at your brain, and they very rarely talk to each other. So when you have a systemic problem or a multi-system problem, which is my illness, it's very hard because it takes a while for people to talk to each other and then collaborate and then sort of figure out, wait, there's something, okay, where did it generate from? Where's the actual issue? So I've got this condition, and in my 20s and 30s, it was just like early 30s, a lot of gut problems. I had Crohn's disease, I had hormone imbalances, and women who show up in doctor's offices being like, my hormones are kind of off, and I have tummy trouble, and I'm not sleeping well, and my joints ache a lot. The first thing that American doctors tend to do is be like, oh, you're depressed, or you have anxiety, or you have like chronic fatigue, which is kind of like a nonsense diagnosis. It's like, they're like, your diagnosis is chronic fatigue. And you're like, that's a symptom. That's not, you know what I mean? Like, you're like, I don't feel like that's So for a couple of years when I really needed treatment and needed to be managing the illness to stop it from progressing, I was getting labeled with these, she's just depressed, or she's just stressed out, or she's just this. And at 33, all of that culminated in my organs just stopped working. I went into bladder failure, and then I went into intestinal failure completely right after that. And so at that point, a bunch of doctors were finally like, oh, this girl's legitimately sick. And we've spent like the last 6 or 7 years where we could have been collecting data, like, hopping her up on, trying to make me take like anti-anxiety meds, or saying, here, just take this antidepressant and go meditate. I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's that simple. But I went into organ failure at 33 and ended up at Cleveland Clinic, which is like the number 1 or number 2 hospital in the United States, depending on what department you need to be seen in. And they finally put the puzzle together and were like, oh, your genes are messed up, your gut's jacked up, and you're a little bit different. But they got me sorted. I spent some time on a feeding tube. I spent a lot of time in rehab, sort of like I had lost 35 pounds and all of my muscle. So I completely atrophied. And that was 2 years ago. So now it's 2018, and I'm off the feeding tube, and I'm back to a normal weight. And the last 2 years have been very much about how do you take a body that started to die and started to decompose, while you were alive, as far as, watching your tissues break apart from lack of nutrition. How do you put that back together? And then how do you take that rebuilt body and like make it do things like jiu-jitsu, or go back to work, or just participate? And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So that answered one of my questions I had for you, was the diagnosis, because I know that these things can be difficult for doctors to chase down a little bit. Another question that came up, though, is you were at your worst 2 years ago. I first was aware of you. I think I heard your husband on a podcast. He did was it a full 24-hour roll-a-thon to help raise money for expenses?
He did. That maniac. He rolled for 24 hours straight to raise awareness for CIPO and also to raise money for my catastrophic medical expenses. So and Jiu-Jitsu Times covered him for that. He talked to a few people, and So he did that.
how long ago was that? Was that right about this 2 year mark, or a little bit after?
No, that was about a year into it. So that was, I think it was around, it was like 18 months ago that he did that.
So, okay. Well, I'll tell you, I love the jiu-jitsu community, and that was a heartwarming story. Not just that your husband would take the time and put in the effort to do this, but this means that other people had to be willing to come out and roll at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. to keep this going. Were you on the mats with him, or where were you when this was happening?
The jiu-jitsu community is kind of unbelievable. At that point, my husband didn't have his own gym yet. So, Charlie Heyman, one of our NOLA BJJ gym owners and black belts, he opened his gym and made it available for any people to come in and roll with my husband, and to, just like spectators, people came in off the street, heard that this crazy guy was going to get in some karate pajamas and roll around in New Orleans. People came off the street to watch him do it. But, we had members from our gym, members from other gyms. There were some people passing through town who had heard about it, who just came, rolled for a little bit. And I was there for some of it. At that point, I still wasn't well enough to be out of the house for a full 24 hours. But in prepping for his 24-hour roll, like I spent a couple hours in the kitchen making him like little easy calorie bursts and fat and protein bombs that he could eat that he wouldn't likely throw up if he was totally fatigued or trounced. So that was my way of contributing, was the night before, making sure he had like his nutrition and his hydration squared away. He would take, like 5-minute breaks, and we would just like rub his, his hands and his feet and his knees and try and keep him loose and like jam, hard-boiled egg and some almond butter in his mouth and then send it back out there. But I was on the mats for a couple hours, and I did roll with him at the beginning, and I rolled with him again midway through. But it was actually Charlie Heyman, our black belt, who really, towards the end, those last couple of rolls where he was playing a lot of deep half guard, playing a lot of, maybe guard pulling, just kind of in general. By the very, very end, his jiu-jitsu style was very different. And the people that got together and made sure that he had someone at midnight, had some at 1:30 or 2:30, and 5 in the morning is, where else? Like, who else is going to do that except for the jiu-jitsu community?
Yeah, that's awesome. If anybody's considering a fundraiser, that's an awesome idea. Tell me a little bit about what was his preparation like for this? Did he spend some time gearing up and conditioning? And I'm really curious to what his recovery was like afterwards.
Well, cutting to the recovery, it was like 16 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Like, it looked like somebody had shot him with like a bear tranquilizer. Like, he just got home and was out. He stays really, really active all the time. At that point, he was working on setting up his gym, but he was training a fair amount. And I'd only been out of the hospital for a couple of weeks at that point. So it was a pretty mammoth undertaking in that he didn't have a huge amount of prep time for it. We got back from the rehab center in Ohio to our home in New Orleans, and he had like a couple weeks where he started rolling again, where he tried to get his cardio up a little bit, but he was just kind of like, I'm just going to do it. He was like, if I try and prep for it, there's no way that you can prep to roll for 24 hours really, so I should just do it. And yeah, he really did just do it. I would say that he was training like 3 times a week at that point. Like, it was actually a period of time where he was training less than, he has, just because of transitioning back from the hospital and trying to get loaded back into our house. And he was helping me deal with my, getting settled back at home for the first time in like half a year after being away. So he's an animal. Yeah. He trained like, 3 times a week, loaded up his little snack bag, stated his intent. And I think a big part of his preparation was like meditative. It was about, how do I get my head into this? How do I, he was spending a lot more time meditating and looking into breath work. And he's a big meditator and big pranic breather, Gracie breathing, yoga breathing, Wim Hof method type guy. I think in part as a result of that experience, because so much of it was about, what are you doing with your oxygen? How are you using your breath? And where's your head at? What at the point when your body goes, I've had enough? But his whole purpose for doing a 24-hour roll as a fundraiser was, if my wife can suffer this physically, he wanted it to be 24 hours because he's like, your illness is a 24-hour challenge for you, and you don't ever get an hour of your day off from your illness. So I'm going to have one 24-hour period where I don't get to walk away from the challenge. I thought that was really kind of beautiful and insane, absolutely insane. But it took him about a week before he could open his hands completely again. So the 16 hours of sleep was an important part of the recovery, but also just ice baths and time, I think, was the key player in his being well again after that.
Yeah, well, kudos to both of y'all. That almost choked me up a little bit hearing you talk about it. So that's a great story. Yeah. Tell me a little bit before we move on to more jiu-jitsu-y type stuff. What's the prognosis for you, and what do bad days look like?
Oh, man. So prognosis is, it's a big question mark. there was a point where they were talking about, having to do like a 6-organ transplant for the very sickest patients, the people who stop being able to absorb fluid, even water. They can't drink water anymore. Nothing can move out of their body. That's what they have to do. They have to take out your gallbladder, your pancreas, your stomach, your intestines, all of that. And so for a period of time, I was being seen by the transplant team, and that shit was scary. It's like 6 organs is a lot that could go wrong. So your worst case scenario with CIPO and these sort of connective tissue genetic disorders is that you end up on the organ transplant list. For me, my rehab went a lot better than anybody predicted. It was sort of when I got put on the feeding tube. The type of feeding tube I was on is called TPN, and it's a port, basically. It's a catheter that they put in your chest, and this tube lives in your heart and sticks out of your chest, kind of above your boob, if you have a boob. And you plug it into this backpack full of protein and carbohydrates and, liquid nutrients, and it absorbs through your heart. So your body's not supposed to nourish itself that way. It super doesn't like it. And so if you stay on TPN, your liver blows out, sometimes within a couple of years, sometimes within a decade. And when I first, started on the TPN, I was thinking, I'm going to be dead in a couple of years. Like, there's no way I'm going to, if you're telling me that 10 years max is how long my liver is going to go before it blows out, I'm going to be in trouble. And at that time, they were sort of saying, we don't see a way for you to come off of TPN. We don't see you eating again. But after 6 months, I met this really amazing, 2 amazing doctors, actually, who had nothing to do with the gut or medicine at Cleveland Clinic. One's name was Dr. Xavier Jimenez, who's the head of a rehab facility there called the Chronic Pain Rehabilitation Program. And it's an amazing program. It's got kind of like a corny name, like chronic pain, but like the people who get accepted into the program are, like big butch guys from West Virginia who get like blown apart in motorcycle accidents and are put back together and have steel rods in their bodies and like don't know how to live with the pain, or people like me who, have to live their lives completely differently and don't really know how to do that. Or there was another girl who had the same condition I do, these connective tissue disorders, and there were people who had just, been burned badly in fires or in organ failure. So, it's for some of your sickest patients, but also the sort of patients that are told, you're never going to be well again. You're never going to have another good day. Your life's never going to look the same, and you're never going to be off these painkillers, so you're going to be a zombie for all of it. Everyone goes into that program just feeling like, well, so why am I not committing suicide? Like, why? Like, why am I even out of rehab facility? I'm just going to die, right? But the guy who runs this program is like, nah, I'm not buying that you're going to die, and I'm also not buying that you can't get off your painkillers, and I'm also not buying that you can't have any more good days. Like, he's very different from other doctors, and he was just kind of like, I know you can't eat, and I get all this, but like, why don't we give your guts several months off and start retraining your nervous system? Like, it doesn't function right. Your nerves don't fire right. Your muscles in that area don't fire right. But what if we can retrain other nerves and other muscles to do their job? I was like, this is never going to work. And I was totally wrong. So for about a month at CPRP, I worked with him and worked with his team. It's just sort of like recalibrating my nervous system. And a lot of it was the same corny woo-woo shit that I was convinced wouldn't work, and that I know a lot of people think won't work, especially when they're suffering, especially when they have chronic pain, especially with, when you get to the point where you're living off morphine, or you're living off of Dilaudid, or you're living off, oxys, like these really heavy duty painkillers. It changes your nervous system, and it makes you believe that your nervous system cannot change back because your pain is so bad, your function is so limiting, and your brain has been completely poisoned by these painkillers and your own pain, your own stress hormones, to be stuck. Like, you just get trapped thinking, this is as good as it gets. This is as good as it'll ever be, and it's so bad. I hate that I'm alive. And then if you just start working with it the right way, it sounds corny, but if you start meditating and you move your body gently, say you can't sit up because your guts are all inflamed, but you can stretch your ankles and you can stretch your wrists, well, then that's what you do. and then you just keep doing it. And it took a lot of months, and I'm 2 years into my recovery now. But, yeah, I just kept doing that and got more and more and more function back. And about 6 months in, this team was sort of like, okay, we think that there's a chance that your particular intestines, your gut has rested enough that if we put a little nourishment in there, we can test if it absorbs. When your digestive system stops working, there's two issues. It's like, well, one, if the food goes in, how does it come out if it's paralyzed? And the other issue is if it goes in and it is going to come out, will it absorb? Your small intestine is where everything that you eat or drink gets absorbed and assimilated into your body. So if it doesn't work, there's two prongs is what I'm trying to say, is that one issue is, will you go septic because something got stuck in your body? And the other issue is, if we're going to put this stuff in here, is there a reason? Will it absorb? And he said, let's see if it absorbs. So we started feeding me, like, I'm not kidding, a tablespoon at a time, a tablespoon of broth, like one bite of egg. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, this is an infant's amount of food. This is never going to work. But a year later, I have about 12 foods that in the right portion and, eaten the right way. And I need some drugs to help force my body to do what it's supposed to do. But I started being able to eat again. And so we were able to take the feeding tube out. And so for a huge majority of patients, that never happens. They just don't get that function back. But a huge majority of patients don't end up in a program headed by doctors who go, let's get you off these medications that make your nervous system not work. Let's get you off these medications that make you so depressed that you don't believe that you can get better. And let's find a way to stimulate your nervous system to make new connections. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is the prognosis is not great, but I have questions about whether the prognosis is as bad as it is because our treatment protocols that most patients have access to are so bad. And that kind of goes for a lot of injury and a lot of illness, like in the United States in general. I've had such an intense, really up close view of how the medical system works now over like 6 or 7 years, from like, take this pill to, oh my God, do not take this pill, breathe, get out in the sunlight, do this stuff. And it's changed a lot about the way I think about healing and what I think is possible. And, when you go from, you're never going to get this tube out of your heart and you're probably going to be dead within the next 5 to 10 years. And in that next 5 to 10 years, we might cut you open and stick 6 new organs in your body. It'll be torture. We'll all have a great time. Like, to go from that to I'm eating again and I'm back at jiu-jitsu and like my life looks very different, but I'm still living it. It will change your perspective on your prognosis is what I'm kind of trying to say. And I wish more people, not just with my disorder, but more people in general who are really sick or really in pain or really suffering had access to the sort of program that I ended up in. Because if you challenge your body and yourself and your nervous system to make new connections so that you can keep living and living well, at least in my case, apparently it will do some pretty incredible shit to get you there.
Man, that's amazing. I'm imagining what a victory that must have felt like when they pulled that tube out. And at the end of the show, after the show, you and I will talk a little bit, and we'll make sure and put links to relevant organizations and see if we can do our little part to raise some awareness for this and point some people in the right direction for help.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Hey, speaking of helping people, I'd like to ask you a couple questions that I think you can call on your experience to help other people out. Obviously, there's going to be very few people doing jiu-jitsu that have faced the same challenges you have, but training with a sporadic training schedule is something that we hear about all the time. People say, I'm having a hard time getting good at jiu-jitsu because I've got breaks in my training, or there's some weeks I can only go once. What advice do you have for people that are in that position? How can you still get good at jiu-jitsu when your training's all broke up?
Yeah. Okay. So granted, like most people are not putting the brakes on their training because of my condition specifically, but honestly, like why you put the brakes on or what health condition you're trying to rehab, like the rules seem to kind of apply across the board. So like you don't have to have a weird disorder. Like you can have back pain or kids. I consider kids to be a medical condition. Like that definitely prevents some people from training. In my experience, it is about there's two things that you have to do to get better at jiu-jitsu and progress while you're dealing with a limited training schedule. One is, I think a lot of us who practice have some sort of athletic background or, had some sort of, they were a runner, they were a soccer player, they were a wrestler, they were whatever. You're using your body because you come from some sort of experience using your body. And unfortunately, a lot of the time, especially in this country, we have kind of like an all or nothing thing, like give your all or give nothing, leave it all on the mat. Don't leave it all on the mat. If you have a medical condition or you have, limited opportunities to train, jiu-jitsu is unique in that, like anything, you have to train regularly, and repetition is part of mastery. You're not going to master anything if you don't repeat it, especially in jiu-jitsu. So departing from that whole all or nothing, train until you throw up, go until muscle failure thing is really important so you can stay consistent. When I first started being well enough to train full time, I really struggled with that. I felt like if I wasn't pushing myself until I was shaking or pushing myself, to the point where I was dripping sweat and, looked like something out of like an Instagram photo, then I wasn't, trying hard enough and people wouldn't see how devoted I was. And that was some nonsense because I was pushing myself so hard that my recovery would take 3 days or 4 days. And then suddenly you're back there and you've only trained twice a week. So I think it's really important for people to release all or nothing and understand that going 40% on the mat, and that goes for any part, your conditioning, your cardio, if what makes you able to repeat and get your multiple training sessions a week in is only doing 20 minutes or only going 40% instead of 80 or 100%, then do that, because that 20 minutes, if you can do it 5 times a week, is actually more valuable than if you did, just 60 minutes the one time or 90 minutes just the one time. Another important part of, let me think real quick. I was 40%. Let me think for a second.
Why
taking time. Go ahead.
I was going to say, while you're thinking, as an old guy, I really embrace that, going at a moderate pace 4 or 5 days a week if I can. I much prefer that than killing myself for one class and then having to take 3 or 4 days to catch up. So I buy into that 100%.
100%. And, my husband, he isn't just a brown belt and he isn't just a coach. He's a fighter, and he's, I guess they call it semi-pro here. He gets paid, but not, a huge amount just yet. But he's an undefeated, still in his weight class right now, cage fighter down here in mixed martial arts. And a lot of my wellness and my understanding, that you need to back off and not push too hard was watching his training camps and watching how much better he would do. His very first MMA match, he cut weight like the high school wrestler that he was and like the college wrestler that he was. Like, it was way too much weight. He looked like, an end-stage AIDS patient, and I don't mean that as a joke. I was visibly, worried about my husband for his first fight because he was so sucked out. And he did a great job, and he won. But his next match, he just thought about it differently. Like, I don't want to go in so depleted. I don't want to go in so light. I don't want to work so hard to show everybody what a hard worker I am that I don't actually have anything left in my body for the fight. And so for both of us, we kind of traveled that path together of hey, we can back off, validating through effort, how well we're doing. We can back off going 100% and really look at how do you put a sustainable fight camp and a sustainable practice into your life, and it's by not overdoing it. Yeah. And the other big thing with training is if it's going to be sporadic, you can't train all the time. Just make sure you're moving every day. A lot of people, that all or nothing sort of mindset really messes people up in fitness and wellness and in healing in general, because you think this class is 60 minutes. I have to be there for the whole 60 minutes. Otherwise, I didn't do anything. Or worse, people go, well, I was going to train this morning, but I didn't. So now what's the point? And you're like, no, if it's 3 p.m. in the afternoon and it got away from you and you can't train in the morning and you can't even do a full 60 minutes, just doing 20 minutes of yoga is going to move your blood. It's going to move your lymph. It's going to lengthen your tendons. It's going to break up fascia. When you don't move because you feel like, oh, well, I could move, but I'll only be doing it for 15 minutes and it doesn't matter. It really does actually matter. Taking the time on days that you can't train to stretch, taking times on days you can't train to foam roll, taking the times on days that you can't train to just walk the dog around the block for 15 minutes at a brisk pace, like all this stuff that sounds sort of obvious. We have so many apps and like fitness experts and wellness experts and stem cells and cryo, and you know what? Like all of that stuff is amazing. But if you don't have access to it, getting on the floor and stretching your body and making sure that you don't lock up or feed illness. Thing I learned through this health journey that is universal to everybody, no matter what, is if you don't move, you definitely lose it. Like move it or lose it is true. The people who were in the hospital with me who would get the multiple organ transplants or who had just had like a heart transplant, the ones who got up the next day and were like, they looked like death, they felt like death, but they were walking up and down the hallway, they got out of the hospital so much faster than the people who just laid there. So if there's a part of you that can move, like seize that opportunity. The body and your cells and your immune system love that shit.
Yeah, that's great advice. So like if even if you don't feel like you can do jiu-jitsu, if you feel like you can get out of the house and you go to the gym and be there with your teammates and maybe do the warm-up or maybe do part of the technique portion, anything's better than nothing, I think is what I'm hearing you saying.
Absolutely. And, watching jiu-jitsu, like going, if you can't train, but like going to watch the drills that they do, watching them drill, like that's something that I do a fair amount still, like, and was doing when I was unwell and in rehab. Like, your jiu-jitsu family is your tribe, and part of being well and part of being healthy and being athletic and fit is like having a good social connection, having a good family, and having your mind be in the right place. And sometimes, even if you can't train, just getting to the gym and seeing those people that support you, being able to see what they're working on so that you don't fall too far behind. All of these things kind of like you can patch some wellness together through that. It's like, don't disconnect entirely. Don't think because I can't train or because I can't participate, I'm just going to watch Netflix for the next 18 hours. Like, nah, like do something.
Right. So, Kimberly, you've offered a lot of great advice already. One more question for you along those lines. What advice would you have for women coming on the mats?
I have kind of like 4 pieces of standard advice. I get asked this a fair amount because I'm the wife of someone who runs a gym and then also someone who participates as a student. And so a lot of women say, what do I do and what do I think? So I've actually thought about this a fair amount. The first piece of advice I have for women, this is not to generalize that like every woman is walking around with some like heavy burden that they need to work out through martial arts. I'm not saying that, but we work with a lot of sexual trauma and physical trauma survivors, whether it's people who have been in domestic abuse situations, whether they've been in a car accident, whether they're rehabbing an injury, or there's someone like me who has, a chronic illness. It's very important for women to own their trauma, physical or emotional, and then kind of figure out what they want to do with it. So going into jiu-jitsu, I say that's important for people to own their trauma because you can find yourself in positions where if you're kind of denying that you have an injury, denying that you have an emotional hang-up, denying that you have some discomfort with being in really uncomfortable situations, you can end up in like a panic attack situation or end up having a bad experience at a gym. So just first things first is if you do want to train, it's not like the Karate Kid, and it doesn't have to be like the Karate Kid, but just, if you are someone who's healing from sexual trauma, I'm a rape survivor, so the very first time I ended up, in there's a strange man that I've never partnered with before, simulating punching me in the face and then, putting me on the ground in like a very rapey position. I was like, oh, this is really disorienting, and I didn't like think about how triggering this could be. It wasn't a big deal, but in hindsight, I wish that I had just been like, oh, I'm going to put myself into some situations. They're going to be uncomfortable, but I'm going to be completely safe and well within that, so I don't have to panic. So just for all women and all people, I should say, because no one is like walking around without trauma at this point in their life, is to just say, hey, know that you might be uncomfortable and prepare for being uncomfortable. And it's super okay to be uncomfortable. Everyone in the room is there to help you maximize and grow through your discomfort. That's usually like the first thing that I say. More general advice beyond that is, one, do not wait to be fit for jiu-jitsu before you start training for jiu-jitsu. Like, I cannot tell you how many times people are like, I really want to start training and I'm super excited about it, but I'm so out of shape. So I'm going to get a gym membership first. And then when I'm in shape, I'm going to come. There is nothing that you can do really to get you in shape for jiu-jitsu except for jiu-jitsu. The amount of people I know who've been like, oh, I'll get my cardio up. No, because if you get on a treadmill or you start running around the block, that's great. But have you ever shrimped across the floor 500 times? Oh, you haven't? Then cool. You're going to spend time and money at a gym or running around the block. That just come to class. The best way to get in shape for jiu-jitsu is to train jiu-jitsu. So just come to class. Do not worry about how out of shape you are. And do not worry if you throw up at your very first class, because you're not the first and you definitely won't be the last person to throw up at class. The second thing is to know what you want from your gym. I think that's important for men and women. But a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not really having the experience you have with this, or, I thought I would like it, but I don't know about this. And it's okay, if you see jiu-jitsu or MMA and you want to train to be a competitor, you think I want to be in the UFC, I want a wall full of medals, then find a gym that has a great competition team and go and start their program. You're going to be focused. You're going to be learning the point system. You're going to be learning how to submission hunt, and you're going to click with that. If you don't want to be a competitor and you want more of a tribal or family kind of feel, stalk gyms' Instagram pages and go to Jiu-Jitsu Times and look up their gyms that they recommend and the gyms that they feature. Talk to people in your community who train, and say, what's the environment like there? Do you guys go out before and after? Are people friendly there? And if what you're looking for is a way to be fit and have family, and you don't want to get too crazy with, all of the fight life and competition stuff, seek out the gyms that fit what you're looking for. And if you're a woman and you really want to train with other women, do the research and find out which gym in your area has the biggest group of women who train competitively or not, and go join that gym. But I think that people knowing what they want to get out of jiu-jitsu and out of training, and then picking where they go and start training based on that, is really important to having a good experience, because each gym is so different and there's so many places to train that, landing at the right spot is just easier when you know what you want out of it. And then finally is just set boundaries. I think a lot of white belts, blue belts, even men and women, but especially women, they feel like, they don't want to hurt people's feelings. They don't want to, if you see somebody who never has a partner at open mat and you're kind of new to training, you're like, oh, I feel for that person. I don't want them to be left out. And then they're 70 pounds heavier than you, and they're a spazzy white belt, and you're a spazzy white belt. And all of a sudden, you have a sprained ankle or a sprained wrist because you wanted to do something nice, or you didn't set the boundary of, do you know what I mean? Early on, communicating what your needs are. Hey, I have a bad knee, so if you could not torque on this, and please don't crank my ankles, and please don't leg lock me like a maniac while we roll. Can we flow? Can we do this? Those are things that you don't learn until later that would be kind of helpful right out the gate. Like if you have a physical need, if rolling with the big spazzy guy or the big spazzy girl results in you being injured all the time, just say, hey, I love you as a person, but I get injured super easily, so we should not train together. Or, you know what I mean? Like, whatever your need is, don't wait until 6 months or a year or 3 years into jiu-jitsu when you know everybody to state what your need is. Kindly and compassionately and with a sense of humor, communicate what your need is, and that way your experience training is consistent and kind of happy from the beginning. Does that make sense?
It does. And the greatest thing about all that advice was it will definitely help women out, but it's applicable to everybody that trains jiu-jitsu as well.
Yeah.
As far as not rolling with the spazzy guy that'll hurt you, even if you just say, no, I'm going to take this round off, you got to start somewhere, but don't be afraid to say no. Definitely, because as a woman, you don't want to subject yourself to, maybe it's just a comfort thing, and as a jiu-jitsu person in general, you don't want to get hurt, and it's easy to just say, I'm going to sit this round out, and then
totally
come back when you see a safer training partner the next round.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. That's really good stuff. How about nutrition? And this is a little different when I'm asking you for advice for nutrition, rest, and recovery. Your situation is very unique. So I guess how do you approach that now, and how do you suggest other people approach that topic?
Yeah. So I'm actually in school for functional nutrition now. My experience with the American medical, system and, prescription drugs and diet. And, I was seeing some of the best gut doctors in the world, and they were saying, what you eat, it doesn't really play into this. You have this problem. Nutrition's not a part of it. And it turned out they were very much wrong about that, but they were doctors, and they're brilliant, and they went to school, and they have these coats and these very nice offices, and I just assumed if you were a doctor, you knew what you were talking about. And it turns out that's not entirely accurate. The average doctor in the United States receives less than 60 to 120 minutes of nutritional training the entire time that they're in med school and residency. That's not much. So throughout the process of healing and recovering and learning how to live with this illness, this disability that I have, I learned a lot about nutrition and a lot about functional medicine, which is not as woo-woo as it sounds by its name. Functional medicine is all evidence-based and rooted in sort of marrying East and West with clinical results. So it's about prescriptions, but it's about surgery, but it's also about regulating your nervous system and what do you put into your gut, what do you put into your liver, what is your food made out of, and how does that all contribute to wellness? How does stress contribute? So I'm so passionate about healing and using nutrition and food and wellness tactics that I was actually like, I want to go get certified in this so that I have some letters after my name and can really work responsibly with other patients like me and other practitioners, because there's so many fighters in my life, and they're like, I'm training 5 times a week and I'm trying to lean out and I'm exhausted and my skin looks terrible, and like my doctor's saying that it's just the way it is, and I'm like, no, what are you eating? And they're like, well, I got this ground hamburger patty and this cheap ass bread and this kind of bullshit government cheese and like this protein powder that I just drink this. And you turn it around and you look at the label and you're like, what is it made of? And it's like the cheapest possible dairy byproducts, a bunch of chemicals that I can't pronounce, and these food dyes and flavorings that make it taste like cookies and cream, even though there's neither cookies nor cream in this weird powder. You're like, you know what, maybe we need to actually care about this stuff a little bit. And what I've been learning throughout the process of going through school and healing my own tissues is that cleanliness as far as nutrition and training and recovery super matters. And this is as someone, who I have to watch the cleanliness and the ethics of my food, because things like random chemicals or fillers that like wouldn't bother most people can really inflame my body and actually shut my organs down. So I'm a little bit more stringent than some people need to be about their diet.
What are just 2 or 3 things that an average person could do to clean up their diet a little bit?
Number 1 is get your meat from pastured or sustainable sources. Don't go to ShopRite or Rouse's and get like the crappiest meat. If you're gonna be a red meat and definitely a bird eater, go to a farm, go to the farmer's market, get to know the people around you, like know your farmers, know how they're doing stuff. Make sure your meat's nice and clean, because when your meat isn't pumped full of hormones and it hasn't been fed like the bodies of the other dead animals from the farm that it's on, it's really good for you. Like it's great for you. So know where your meat is coming from and invest in good meat. I think that's number 1. Pulling dairy out of your diet if you're someone who deals with really bad allergies, bad skin inflammation, acne, or just like lots and lots of aches and pains that are mysterious is really helpful. Some people are lactose intolerant, but a lot of people are actually casein. Casein is a type of protein that is in milk that you can't take a pill for to block. So a lot of people are casein intolerant and they don't know it. And so if you're someone who does everything right, you're stretching, you take the supplements, you're doing all of the things, but you're still aching all the time, or you have really bad gas, or you're like constantly burping and your skin looks terrible and you just can't figure it out, just pull milk and cheese out of your diet for like a month. If you feel better, keep it out. If you don't feel better, fuck it, put it back in. But like, test things. Don't just keep eating things and going, it can't possibly be the things that I eat. None of us, the number 3 piece of advice I would give for people is don't think that the diet of the person in your family or the person that's next to you or the person on TV who looks great that says this is the perfect diet, don't think that that's the right diet for you. Like, number 1, clean meat. Number 2, pull out dairy maybe. Number 3, don't take my advice or anyone else's advice on diet. Really get to know your body, because everybody genetically and everybody, depending on what kind of lifestyle, how active it is, has different needs. And so we have this kind of like, what's the ideal diet? What's this? It's really, really dependent on your body, your genetics, your stress levels, and where you live. So working with a nutritionist, like an integrative nutritionist or a functional nutritionist, if you're someone dealing with, I can't heal right, I have no energy, my hormones are off, I feel like I have no gas in the tank even though I just started training, looking at your food and your diet with somebody is actually a really good idea. And the 4th thing is collagen powder. If you are a jiu-jitsu person and you like protein shakes, or your skin is getting like torn up by the mats and people's gis and it's like you're constantly scabbing over and you're all red, or if you're just someone who is into health, collagen protein as the protein in your shakes, I tell everybody to get down on that. Your hair is made out of it, your skin's made out of it, your tissues, your tendons, your ligaments, everything's made out of collagen. So like supplement with that stuff. It's a really clean, non-inflammatory protein source. It mixes super well into everything. You can like throw it in broth or in a protein shake. You can put it in your coffee. You can put it in like pretty much anything. And it's a really good, easy, like 10 to 15 grams of super clean protein to build muscle and healthy skin out of.
So I was going to ask a follow-up question about good protein sources for people that do cut dairy out or people that are not meat eaters. Yeah. I'm guessing that would be your number 1 suggestion.
Well, yeah. So I was vegetarian for years and years. Now, because of my condition, it's harder for me to break down vegetables, so I eat meat again. But so I understand where vegetarians and vegans are coming from, and I understand where carnivores are coming from, and I understand where omnivores are coming from. Collagen is an animal-based protein, so if you're a strict vegetarian or vegan, it won't fit with the ethics of that. But as far as if you're a vegetarian who doesn't mind broth, collagen is basically like if you took a bone broth and just reduced it and dried it out into a powder.
I got you.
So collagen is if you don't like meat, but you're okay with consuming animal products, collagen is an option. If you're vegan, it gets a little bit harder. get into your legumes and your grains, replacing that. But in general, I personally feel like a lot of athletes should be looking at like small amounts of fish. If they don't like meat, if you're not down with it, I totally get it. But find an ethically sourced wild fisherman, or find an ethical person, an ethical company like Primal or Bulletproof that does sustainable protein, and use that as your protein supplement with all your veggies. I know it's consuming animals, but if you're doing it ethically, I believe that having a body that functions really well allows you to be alive to make more ethical choices that help the entire planet. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's all well and good to be ethical until you're dying. And then if you're dying, you can't do anything ethical or anything good for the planet. So, like, take care of the planet, but take care of yourself so that you can take care of the planet.
There you go. There you go. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I don't know if I mentioned in the introduction that you're a contributing author to the Jiu-Jitsu Times webpage.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
And so I wanted to ask you or just touch on a couple of the articles that you've written that I thought was interesting. But I wanted to ask you first if you had advice for new writers. Actually, I wanted to ask a couple questions. First of all, when you started writing, did you have any hesitation about writing about jiu-jitsu from the perspective of only being a blue belt?
I definitely had some reservations about that. When I first heard that Jiu-Jitsu Times was looking for contributing writers, I'm one of their weekend correspondents, so I do a lot of content that goes up on Saturdays and Sundays right now, and like coverage of fights over the weekend. I've been a journalist since 2007. I started in New York as a journalist and fact checker and interviewer, and I've written for The Economist, and I've written for the New York Times. So I felt confident as like a writer and a journalist, but I did not feel confident as like I was like, you're going to let me do recaps of fights? Like, I've been training for 5 years and I live with, an MMA coach and a high belt, but like, really, you want a blue belt? And, I said to my husband, like, okay, as a blue belt, like, is it okay for me to apply for this job? Like, shouldn't I at least be hiring? He was like, okay, here's the thing. I think you should apply because when you're reading about jiu-jitsu, you're not just reading about jiu-jitsu, you're reading. He's like, he's like, I am a high belt, but I can't write like you, and I can speak about jiu-jitsu, but if you ask me to write about it, like, I can't do it. He was like, you might only be a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, but you're a black belt in writing and communicating with the written word. He was like, so that should put you like somewhere from the perspective of writing about jiu-jitsu around purple belt. And that kind of sold me. I was like, okay. But also it's about how committed are you to being knowledgeable? So as soon as I knew that I was only a blue belt, I was going to be writing, about jiu-jitsu. I was like, okay, well, I need to like completely redouble my efforts. Like, I don't train because of where I am physically enough to like level up to my purple belt next year, but intellectually I can level up my understanding of this. So reading a lot more, watching a lot more, making sure that I'm not missing matches, making sure that every opportunity I have to discuss technique or converse with or learn from higher belts, I'm taking those opportunities. So yeah, does that totally answer the question? It totally freaks me out to be writing as a blue belt, but I am decent at researching and actually writing, so that feels like a good starting point.
Yeah, it does answer the question. I think it also offers some guidance for anybody else that might be considering doing some writing. On the BjjBrick Podcast, we always discuss an article every week, and man, we try and encourage our listeners to contribute, and I have a feeling that part of the reason we don't get a lot of contributions from them is because a lot of them are white belts and blue belts and probably think they're not in a position that they can write an article. But you can always write about what you know about. I mean, I started on this podcast by writing articles for them, and I'm a purple belt, and I felt the same way you did. I just try hard to stay in my lane, and I don't try and offer advice to other purple belts or brown belts or black belts. I try and stick to what I know, and so I appreciate your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
So as somebody with a journalist background, do you have any advice for new writers? How would somebody get started if somebody wanted to submit an article to the BjjBrick, or if they wanted to submit one to Jiu-Jitsu Times? What's a good way to get started?
First thing is know how to string a sentence together, right?
Right. Yep.
It's a weird time, like, because of social media, everybody's writing so much to each other. But as you can see, like, a lot of people, all you have to do is open any comment section to see a lot of people who believe that they're both writers and experts who are neither. So if you want to submit an article to anyone, like, about anything, whether it's like how to raise pigs or how to do jiu-jitsu, like, research how to raise pigs, research jiu-jitsu, and then make sure that you're putting it together with proper punctuation, proper sentence structure, and that you're making the points that you want to make. I tell a lot of people are very gifted communicators, but when you sit down to actually write it out, you lose your message that you can speak or that you can think very clearly. So it's just about I think, like, number one piece of advice is know what you're talking about and what you want to say about it. And if that means researching it or asking an expert, like, do it. It doesn't take that long. Just do the research. But having an idea from a journalistic standpoint, how do I get my work accepted? If you're brand new, reaching out to editors or other writers who work for those companies and just saying, hey, I really would like to write for you. I'd really like to contribute something to you. Can you send me your writer's guidelines? Or can you tell me, every publication, every blog, every podcast has, like, an angle or a niche that they like to do it. Some people like to have the tone of their writing be very funny. Some people like to have the tone of their writing or their content be, like, absolutely no commentary, just straight journalism. I don't want to hear any opinions. And some people, are like, oh, we don't tell, like, the big stories. We only do inspirational stories. Or, you know what I mean? Like, for each... Don't think that every idea will work for every outlet. And if you do have an idea, start asking people just really nicely, too. Don't make any demands. Just contact people and say, I love your publication. Here's what I like about it. I want to contribute in some way. Can you tell me what you're looking for in your writers, or request a copy of the writer's guidelines if they have that? And they'll tell you exactly what they're looking for. And you can start to, if you have a training partner who absolutely loves training with other people who pull guard, like, then cater your training to, like, work with that partner and give them what they want. It's kind of the same thing. Like, what does an editor want? What is the tone of the publication? And, like, kind of build from there.
So basically a lot of homework and a lot of research.
Yeah, the sort of stuff that makes people not want to write or do anything ever, basically. But yeah, writing and content creation, journalism, like, writers are weird and kind of antisocial for a reason. They're like, oh, I'm going to go out in the world and I'm going to interview this celebrity. I'm going to know this stuff. You're like, no, you're going to spend 15 minutes doing that, and you're going to spend 9 hours doing research, writing, and editing. If you hate that stuff, don't be a writer. Like, do something else. I think is really good advice.
Exactly. Okay, so if we touch on just a couple of your articles here, we'll round out a nice hour for this interview. I wanted to ask you specifically about BJJ Behind Bars, how Jiu-Jitsu changed one man's life.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I love that story.
Did you have an opportunity to talk?
To know?
Well, first of all, did you have an opportunity to talk to him personally when you were doing the research for this?
I did. He and I got on the phone for about, like, an hour one morning, and it was like I was in tears, like, 2 times. Evan is an amazing human being, and if I was in Philadelphia or the Pennsylvania area that he's in, like, I would probably fire my trainer, who is my husband, just to, like, go spend more time with Evan, because he's that kind of inspiring and wonderful to talk to.
Yeah, coincidentally, and this is just absolute coincidence, Byron just interviewed him for our podcast recently. It will air, or it just aired, so it'll be a month or so before this one airs. And so when you're listening to this, guys, go back and listen to that episode. It'll be a good supplement to this. And also make sure and go to Jiu-Jitsu Times and check out the article. He's absolutely an amazing guy. What was your big takeaway after getting off the phone with him?
My big takeaway was I want every person, male or female, that I know to have that kind of outlook on life and personal accountability. Like, the thing that was really amazing talking to Evan as far as just what he'd been through, and he said to me, I'm on the outside now. I've got, my own car. I've got my own business. I've got an 800 credit score. And, my neighbors and my friends say to me, Evan, you've only been out, this many years. How do you have all this stuff? And he's like, and he didn't say it like a dick. He said it really sweet. He was like, and I'm like, you've been on the outside for 18 years. How do you not have this stuff already? And it just, the way he said it, like, it was so, it was just funny and sweet at the same time, because the entire interview, he was like, I messed up. I did things wrong. Things went wrong in my life because of crappy choices I made because I wasn't dealing with my stuff. And then one day I decided I was just not going to blame anybody who did bad things to me anymore for my stuff, and I was going to handle it. And if what I wanted was a car and a business and this credit score and to be free, if what I had to do to get those things was do these things right, then I was just going to do them right. And it's actually really rare that you hear anybody talk about that now. Like, so much of our lives is something else. It's blaming a political party, or it's blaming your parents, or it's blaming, your some oppressor for something. And Evan was like, yeah, all those things exist, but like at the end of the day, it's up to me to get it right. So I loved that.
Yeah, that's a great example that, I was raised in a bad neighborhood. I'm poor. This, that, the other thing. Mm-hmm. And when you finally say, this bad thing happened to me because I made this bad choice, that's when you can start making some progress forward.
Absolutely. And, as someone who he'd experienced a completely different type of adversity for me, a type of adversity that I know nothing about. I am a white woman who's never been to jail. So I don't know what his struggle is like, but his takeaway from the same, I was in this hospital and this rehab facility and had to rebuild my life. And I didn't hear much different in his story. I mean, okay, there was a lot different. I was not having to get into hospital fights with people because people were mean mugging me. That's not an experience I had. But at the end of it, his takeaway was, bad things happen and you have to process it, and you have to just bit by bit, one step at a time, put your life back together. And that's the only way to get on the other side of it. That was the exact same experience I had. And so it felt like there was kind of a sort of redemptive rebuilding through line that we all experience traumas. We all make bad choices. We all have bad things happen. But at the very core of it, what you have to do is just start putting it back together bit by bit and not quit.
Yeah, that was awesome. So let me ask you about one more, changing gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Is starting from your knees stupid? Tell me about that article.
The section got very heated on Jiu-Jitsu Times about that article too. I just happened to find this video from an Asia-based fighter, Ramsey Dewey, who put it together a video that was very provocatively titled "Starting from the Knees is Stupid." And for people from the Gracie School, some Gracie schools anyway, they would say take that up with the original professors. I personally, I like to start from my butt, or I like to start from my feet. I don't like to start from my knees, and I never have. I've always felt like it's midway between one position that I would find myself in or not. So I'm sort of if there's legitimately no room on the mat because there's so many people there, start on your butt, because I'll probably end up on my butt, or start on your back. I like to start on my back or my butt because I feel like those are places that I genuinely end up in competition, in training. I'm always there. I never get on my knees, really, when I'm rolling. It sounded a lot dirtier than I meant it to, but you know what I mean. So I accidentally found myself aligning with this provocative YouTube video. I was like, man, my reaction to the video was like, really, like, we're fishing for people to like fight now with a title like, you know, it's starting from the knees stupid. And then I was sitting there, I was like, oh, but I only ever start from my feet or my butt or maybe my back. Damn, I kind of agree with this provocative, silly YouTube video from this guy in Asia who I've never met. But I don't think that it's stupid, but I see some strategical problems with starting from the knees. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, I definitely will not sit there and do basically stand-up grappling on my knees. I'll actually grab a guy's lapel and I'll pull bottom side control before I'll spend 5 minutes grappling for my knees. I guess I hadn't really thought about it, but I would agree with this guy too. I'm a proponent of starting from a position if need be. If the mats are real crowded, say, hey, start my open guard or start my half guard or something. We'll just start from there.
Right, and also, like, when you start from your knees, especially as, like, a lower belt, don't you kind of feel like a sad miniature dinosaur? Like, you're kind of on your knees and you're kind of hand fighting, but it's pretty ineffective because you're both on the same level, and neither of you would ever stay at, like, if there's something weird, it's like sad miniature T-Rex fighting when I think about it, so... Yeah, I guess we're all accidentally Team Ramsey Dewey on this one.
Okay, well, let's just touch on one more, and let's stay in the mode of being provocative. Fight to win pro. Seth says that point fighting is just fighting not to lose. What's your take on that one?
Man, again, I was like, oh, and he's awesome. Like, whether you disagree with him or not, like, the way he words things, I just love it. I couldn't love grapplers or fighters in the way that they tend to speak, like, more. I'm from New Jersey originally, so I really appreciate people who are just like, here's this provocative thing. I'm just going to say it. Insert curse word here. Like, I kind of love that way of communicating, but... that was another one where I was like, oh, man, people are going to be arguing in the comments section. I don't know about all this. It feels too provocative. But I love submission hunting. I'm not particularly gifted at it myself yet, but as a very, very tiny person who got involved in martial arts, I originally got involved in jiu-jitsu because I got mugged, like, savagely mugged, living in a shithole in Brooklyn, and was like, well, I never want to find myself in the position of not knowing what to do ever again. So I'm going to start, training some base level stuff, and I want to train jiu-jitsu because I'm tiny, so I'm probably going to get knocked to the ground and be operating there. I'm not going to be point fighting when my lizard brain kicks in and I'm like attacked or in a rape situation or in a street fight situation, which I've been in a couple times now. I don't point fight, and I think it's provocative, and I would rather not take a side, but I'm not a super gifted competitor, like competition competitor. So I'm going to continue with like submission hunting and enthusiastic pursuit of submissions over enthusiastic pursuit of points. However, if you want to collect a lot of hardware and you want to get some sponsorships, doesn't matter how you feel about it, you definitely need to learn how to point fight because that's how you get paid to do jiu-jitsu professionally. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to play.
You're up for.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here for a second. The value I see in point fighting is, especially at the lower belts, is it rewards you for moving to a safer and a more dominant position. I agree with Seth. I think probably what Seth's getting at is these guys that get an advantage or they get a 2 or 3 point lead and then they just try and stall for the rest of the fight. That definitely is fighting not to lose. But from a training perspective, I do like encouraging students that, you may be able to pull off some submissions from bottom half guard, but there's real value in getting that sweep and then moving to side control, which is much more dominant, much safer. So that's sort of my devil's advocate. I will say out of the submission-only rule sets. Seth's rule set is my favorite, where he's just got the 3 judges at the end of the fight. Mm-hmm. They just determine who won. I'm not a big fan of the overtime fighting from specific positions. I've seen fights where one guy dominates, and then in that little overtime, the other guy gets some fluky little victory and then wins the fight. So I do like the Fight to Win Pros method of picking a winner if there is no submission, for sure.
Absolutely. It's a great promotion. But you know what? You're totally right. Point fighting is a great way to keep somebody who cannot yet think a submission motivated to continue training. It's like little gold stars. Every point is a gold star sticker, and I can get behind that. So thank you. I like playing devil's advocate. That's great.
Awesome. All right, Kim, I think I've taken up enough of your time, but before we go, is there anyone that you want to give a shout out to? Any coaches, teammates, anybody you'd like to thank for their help along your journey?
Absolutely. I want to shout my husband, Ray Lopez, NOLA MMA out. I would never have trained grappling or combat or anything if he hadn't been like, I know you're not feeling well, and I know you're real sick, but I think if we start by training 2 minutes a day and then training 5 minutes a day and then just build up to 60 minutes a day, you could do this and really benefit from it. He's an amazing coach and a fantastic coach of people with different bodies that function differently. So I think my husband deserves a shout out for rolling for 24 hours to support me and also for getting me involved in the sport to begin with. Mateus Meester and Charlie Heyman are black belts here in New Orleans. They're wonderful. Avery and Kit from Jiu-Jitsu Times, I want to shout them both out as practitioners, but also when my family was really, really, we were homeless and I was sick and we didn't know how we were going to do things, they featured my story and they featured my husband's story. And then when, 2 years later, when I was well enough to work, they gave me an opportunity to write for the site. So as far as people that you haven't even gotten to choke or punch or kick or do anything with, being supportive within the community, I think that they are fantastic examples of how this community works and supports itself even across great distances. I want them to get the shout out as well.
Any organizations you'd like to give a shout out to that are doing research into some of the health issues you've struggled with?
So, funny thing is that my personal diagnosis and disease is so rare that we don't actually have anybody researching us right now. They're researching us, but they're not doing pointed studies on my condition yet. But I would say that if anybody's dealing with what I have is called a motility disorder, or if they're living with any kind of chronic pain that really affects their life, I would love to have them look into or donate to Cleveland Clinic's Chronic Pain Rehabilitation Program. It's run by Dr. Xavier Jimenez. That's Jimenez with a J. But whether you're struggling with gut disease, whether you're addicted to painkillers because of a very serious medical condition, whether you're just living in pain because you're a grappler or an athlete whose body's been taken apart, you don't have to end up addicted to painkillers. You don't have to end up living off of prescriptions as a zombie. And for everyone who's been told by a doctor, you can't get better, there's nothing else we can do, it's just not accurate. And Chronic Pain Rehabilitation Program and programs like it, they can refer you to people. If you contact them and you can't actually get out to Cleveland Clinic, they will refer you to other programs, East Coast, South Coast, West Coast, where you can start to work with people. If you're living in chronic pain, if you're living with severe disabilities, it can absolutely get better than it is. You just have to ask people who believe that it can get better, and not all doctors believe that it can. So Chronic Pain Rehabilitation Program, give them money or give them a call, but do something.
Awesome. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Finally, awesome. Where can people find you if they want to keep up with you, if they want to see what's going on? Are you on social media?
I am on the social medias. I don't have a fake name. I just use my name, Kimberly Kaye. Last name's Kaye, and I'm on Facebook. I keep a lot of my health journey settings on public so that other people with CIPO, other people with connective tissue disorders, other people with gut disease, or just other freaks can find me and track my medical journey. And I'm on Instagram constantly posting photos from training or from, I have a special needs Argentinian dogo named Poet with a lot of personality. There's a lot of photos of him on there. So if you're like really into like bad jokes, pictures of people you don't know training martial arts, or like a special needs dog doing ridiculous things, at Kimberly_K on Instagram is your account. Trust me.
Awesome. We'll put links to all of those in the show notes. Kimberly, I want to thank you again for taking your time out to chat with me today, for sharing your experiences with our listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank Kimberly for being on the show, taking her time out to talk to me, and I'd really like to thank her for her attitude and all that she does for the jiu-jitsu community.
Yeah, that was great to have her on, and it's nice to see kind of the behind the scenes of what's going on at Jiu-Jitsu Times, and with somebody who's so many articles we've read and enjoyed and learned from. So I like that, the aspect of looking at kind of the Jiu-Jitsu world from her perspective, and she does have some interesting ideas about Jiu-Jitsu.
Yep, and she started writing as a blue belt. So again, we discuss an article every week, and anybody out there that wants to send us one, we'd love to put it on the show.
Yeah, and Kimberly, I know you listen to this. We missed a lot of articles. I know you write a lot of articles. If you write one you think that we need to cover, send it to us, bjjbrick@gmail.com, or send it through our Facebook fan page, and we'll definitely cover it and discuss it here on the podcast. So we have a normal episodes, the non-extra ones. These are special episodes here, my friends. We have the tip of the month, and we have a question as well that we like to answer. And the other episodes, we have a quote of the week and a article we cover,
and the audiobook,
the audiobook. But this question we have this time is about sleeping. Somebody, and I know this is fairly common, you train in the evening, and then when you go home, sleep is a little bit hard to come by. Maybe you're a little too worked up. Maybe you're excited from the training. Maybe jiu-jitsu's in your mind. Maybe it's a physical thing. But people a lot of times have a hard time going to sleep after coming home from training.
And I would tell you, I'm that guy. When I do train later on at night, I do get fired up. I start thinking about jiu-jitsu. My heart rate goes up because I'm amped. I get done with jiu-jitsu. I've got that high, coming after it. I may eat when I get home, and then trying to fall asleep. I have run into that problem where jiu-jitsu's running through my head. My heart rate's still up. My cortisol levels are still up, and I have trouble sleeping. So this, is a great question, and I'm telling you, I'm going to learn a lot from this one too.
Yeah, Gary told us before the show that his answer was NyQuil and Budweiser, but we're encouraging him to find other solutions.
Yeah, they told me do not say that. So
we're going to keep
that one out. Yeah.
So Gary, I actually don't have this problem. I sleep as well on training nights as non-training nights. So all what I have to offer is just things that we already know about getting to sleep. They talk about, screen time. It's not really going to help you to watch a lot of TV or play video games right before bed. That's important. You mentioned that sometimes you'll go home and eat. I think you got to be a little bit aware of what you eat, how much you're eating, because if your body's busy digesting food, it might be harder to fall asleep. Big pepperoni pizza is probably not the answer at 8:30 or 9 o'clock.
Man, that sounds good, though, Joe.
It does, doesn't it?
I know what I'm doing when we're done with the podcast.
What's your take on this, Byron?
Of course, everybody is a little different, and we're not going to be able to solve anybody's problem with a standard piece of advice. But I would invite you to experiment with your own body and mind and find ways to help you find that sleep a little quicker. I know, having I have a problem. Having had this problem before, sleeping, finding a hard time to sleep, that is so frustrating to lay in bed and to know that it's going to affect your tomorrow. You're not going to be 100% with it. You're going to be tired. The morning's going to be hard. And as the time goes by, I get more and more frustrated with how I'm performing as a sleeping person. This has been a few years ago when the last time I struggled with sleep. My problem when I would struggle with sleep is I couldn't shut my mind off. I would lay there and I would think of ideas and I would think about problems and I think of how to solve them. It's like, go to sleep. And my brain would just not want to stop thinking of things. That's a different problem than the person who goes to bed and their body physically is not being able to shut off. They're wired up. Their heart rate's still, a higher rate than it typically is at rest. Their muscles are all still working. So I would say identify what it is that is your problem. Is it your brain won't shut off? Not in a bad way. It won't shut down the computer for you, or is it your body is still wired up? And work on tackling that particular problem, and maybe some other factor that I haven't really dealt with. But for the body thing, I think that's probably a little bit easier of a solution because that can be controlled with like your pre-bedtime routine. If every time you go to bed, you take a shower. And then you brush your teeth and floss and do like one or two other things, and you go to bed. That should help to signal to your body, yes, we're shutting things down. Yes, I'm getting ready for bed. Versus like doing things that you're not supposed to do or not used to doing. Like Gary said, if you're normally eating at 5 hours before bed, and now you're going to eat an hour and a half before bed, that might throw your body kind of out of sync as far as what's happening with it. I gotta say, none of us are sleep experts, but this is just things I noticed with myself. For me, a little bit colder of a shower kind of shuts down the excitedness that my body's feeling. I recover quicker in the evening with a little. I don't like need to take a super hot shower. Take a warm shower, a cool shower, even a cold shower, and a cold shower is really an amazing thing. If you guys haven't done that, it literally hurts. It takes your breath away and does no damage to your body. It's like an amazing, like, I can't believe how bad this is, uncomfortable. But your body will shiver uncontrollably, especially in the wintertime here when the water comes out a little colder. But it doesn't do any damage to you. You're perfectly fine. I think it's a test of willpower is what a lot of times that is. But that, for me, will take my body out of workout mode and to shut it down. And it's my body's rested. Or my body's in a state ready to receive rest. To get my brain to slow down, I found the best thing for me to do, and I don't know why it works so well, is to journal a little bit right before bed. And I literally write the date down and like 2 sentences about what happened in the day. And I think what that does for me is it tells me today's over. Anything important, I've wrote it down here. And then I'm ready for the next day. I'm not going to worry about it, because I would go to bed sometimes and I would stress, will I forget this thing? Will I not remember that? I never go back and read the journal. But once I write it down, my brain can, okay, it's down. I can relax about it. I don't have to stress about that. It's over. And I think I think about the time I started to do that, I stopped having a hard time getting to sleep at night.
Well, Byron, you said you never go back and read your journal. I have actually read his journal. And every day it's the same thing. 2 sentences, like you said, and each sentence is exactly the same. I wish I could be more like Gary. I wish I could be more like Gary. And, that was flattering, Byron.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, back onto this question. I did tell you I've had trouble sleeping. And in the last year, it has got so much better. I think I finally have it figured out. For me, as Byron and Joe said, everybody's a little different. But one thing, well, actually 2 things kind of helped me out. And I had a little bit of both, kind of like what Byron's saying. My mind wouldn't stop. And part 2 was, which I think was more of a hindrance, is my heart rate was up, my cortisol levels are up. I was still amped up from training, and like Joe said, I probably ate that big pepperoni pizza, which didn't help. But the things that have helped me, I have really focused on breathing. I started reading a lot about breathing, and I'm a mouth breather, and that does not help you a lot. It does not allow you to get a lot of air in. So I started doing some research, and I try to breathe through my nose, and I don't get very much in there. I've got small nostrils or something, and it's hard for me. So what I started doing is after doing some research, I bought those nose strips that professional athletes would put on their nose, and man, it's like as soon as I put those things on, I can breathe so much better. And then what I do is I just sit there and take deep breaths, probably real long in, slow out, and probably take 6 breaths a minute. And that just really calms my body down. And the other thing I've started doing is adding a little bit of technology in there. Is I've got a Fitbit now, which is kind of strange for me because I'm never that guy. Somebody gave me a Fitbit, and I just like to track my heart rate. I like to try to get my heart rate as low as possible, as long as it's above 0, so I'm not dead.
We'll get to that, Gary. You're gonna like it.
Yeah, and it's crazy because both those go hand in hand. I can just see like my stress levels, and I just start getting relaxed as I start breathing and get more oxygen into my body, and I see my heart rate going down. And I don't know if it just all of a sudden it just clears my mind. It makes me feel like I'm in a good spot, and that has done wonders for me. And I've been even bragging to my wife here in the last couple months about how good I sleep now, and that helped me. And so like everybody's a little bit different. None of us are sleep experts, as Byron said, besides himself. But you need to experiment a little bit, do some research, and find what works best for you. And hopefully you can get some more sleep, because that's how our body repairs. We need to rest. We're going to perform better, at work, in our relationships, whatever we're doing on the mat when we're well rested.
Man, Gary, I don't necessarily have a problem falling asleep, but my quality of sleep is so much better if I use those nasal strips. We're not sponsored by any nasal strip outfit, but
not yet.
I swear by
not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, I mean, they just help me breathe so much easier when I'm sleeping. Sometimes if I don't use them, I end up mouth breathing at night, and I wake up like the back of my throat's full of sand, and it's horrible.
Yeah. You want to know the crazy thing is, last night my daughter had a bunch of her friends spend the night, and I've got nose strips in both bathrooms, or we've got 3 bathrooms, but in the master bathroom and the one downstairs. And my daughter and her friends were sleeping downstairs, so they had the bathroom downstairs locked up, and I had some nose strips in there, and I was all out upstairs, and I didn't want to go down. They're doing girly things down there.
Very scary.
Thing a bunch of freshmen want is me walking down there. But so I was kind of afraid to sleep last night.
In your leather pants and everything.
I was actually afraid to sleep last night because I didn't have a nose strip, and I was wondering if I was going to sleep well. I actually did sleep well, but not as well as I normally would.
Hey, I'll add one thing before we move on that might legitimately be helpful to some of the people out there that have this question. I have one teammate at one of the gyms I train at. The typical way the class ends is it just kind of tapers off. At this gym, we don't line up, bow out, or anything after class. It just kind of tapers off. And, there's about a 10 or 15 minute period where some of the guys are horsing around. Some of the guys are getting an extra roll in, you're joking. Most everybody's just kind of having a good time. And so their arousal level or whatever remains elevated. But I got this one teammate. He just finds a corner, and for 10 minutes just sits there and kind of stretches and meditates. And man, that guy is so calm and cool and relaxed by the time he walks out of the gym. And you can kind of see him just decompressing, processing what happened during the class, and focusing on his breathing. And so, yeah, if you have a hard time sleeping, it might be worth trying to get into the process of shutting things down as early as you can.
It's a good idea, Joe. Just you need to experiment with yourself. And I would caution anybody, if jiu-jitsu keeps you from sleeping, it's tinkering with your sustainability of training in the long term. So you need to fix that problem, because in 3 or 4 years, you're not going to be happy getting hardly any sleep unless you train. You're going to find something else that you could do. So fix that problem. I'm sure it's fixable, and maybe it's training a different time of day. Maybe it's something like that. But in reality, you should be able to find a way to tinker with things and get that sleep that you need to function well for the next day. I want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters out there. The newest supporters are Jamie, Thomas, Stephen, and Richard. Thank you guys for supporting the BjjBrick podcast, and welcome to the support team there. What Patreon is, it's a website for content producers, like people like podcasters. And if you want to pitch in like $1 every episode, we'd be honored to have that help. And there's a link in the show notes about Patreon. You go on there, and there's our page, and it kind of explains a little bit more. Basically, we can't thank you enough for signing up for Patreon. It means the world to us, but we do send you a small little care package of like a token of our appreciation. We send you out a 5-inch gi patch, a sticker, of BjjBrick, and also you're invited to join the private Facebook group. And that's what I want to remind some of the newer people that have joined. Send me an email, bjjbrick@gmail.com, and say, hey, I'm on Facebook. Here's my Facebook page. Most people, you can't just type in their name and actually find the right one and be confident with that on Facebook. So I need your page, and then I'll get you joined into the private Facebook group where we'll kind of discuss things sometimes before they happen, or we'll get some opinions about different topics, and have a lot of fun in the private BjjBrick Facebook group. So if you're on the fence about it, really appreciate it. It means a lot to us, and we're thankful for all the supports we have. I just want to welcome those new ones that we've gotten recently. So thank you guys so much.
Yep, and I just want to talk about a little quickly about what Patreon does for us. And Joe started off this episode. Byron, you asked him what the extra episode is. And, Joe's like, hey, it's another one that we do a month, when we had another person come on, which is Joe. And Joe said, hey, Byron sent me out some recording equipment so I can do some of my own interviews. And basically, without the help from Patreon, stuff like that would never be able to happen. We probably wouldn't have this extra episode. Joe wouldn't, we'd have to find the money from, ourselves and, work an extra part-time job like Byron and I do.
I knew you were going to go there.
Yeah. I actually wasn't going there.
I thought when you first said that, let me tell you what Patreon does. We're not having to dance nearly as often as we used to.
No, but really, being serious is it has helped us, with the extra episodes. I mean, we've talked about the time when our Facebook page got hacked, and, these things cost money to buy, to get somebody to help us with our hacked Facebook page, to get some recording equipment out to Joe, to put this show on each and every month. And like we said, we don't have no strip supporters, sponsors or anything of that sort. So it's all by Patreon. You guys are awesome, and we couldn't do it without you. Thank you.
Well said, Gary. I didn't know where you were going to go with that. Thought you would take it.
You guys never know where I'm going. I was actually being serious for once. For once.
There it is. Write it down. Episode 273. Gary was serious.
Byron, you can just put that in your journal.
I might put that. Probably not. I'll forget about that one, Gary.
Yeah.
It's so out of character for you. I'll stay up at night thinking about it, though.
Byron, use the no strips.
Gary, have you seen me, my man? I've got a big enough passageway.
Well, you could take 3 of those together and put it on, and it would work.
We're solving each other's problems, and that's great. We'd be happy to train with you guys. If you are in the Wichita area, Gary and I are usually up to train, depending on work schedules and that sort of thing. But hit us up either on the Facebook page or on our email, bjjbrick@gmail.com, and we'll try to arrange a time to get some mat time with you guys. Joe, where can they locate you at, my man?
Man, I'm just south of Houston. If you're in the area, hit me up, and I'll try and get a roll in with you. If not, I can point you to some good gyms in the area. Hey, guys, I got a buddy up in your neck of the woods, so he's going to be there for a few weeks at work, and maybe he'll hit you up for some training. Is he a big, strong dude? Pretty real good at jiu-jitsu? He's going to go to Gary's. Actually, he didn't realize the podcast was actually located in Wichita, and he made a post on Facebook today, said, I got a open mat in Valor Martial Arts.
Nice.
I'm like, is that the same Valor Martial Arts? I hit him up. I said, you in Wichita?
Awesome.
So anyway, hopefully Jim Bob will show up and get a roll in with you guys.
Well, you want to know the crazy thing is, Joe, I had a buddy last week who went down to New Orleans. And he's like, hey, Gary, you know anywhere to train in New Orleans? And I don't know. He was staying near the French Quarter or whatever. I was like, well, I know it's not New Orleans, but it's a little south of there, but you need to train at La Rose Martial Arts. So, I gave a shout out there. It's I know those are a bunch of good guys. He ended up not being on the go. It was a work convention or whatever. But hey, when in New Orleans or that area, head a little south and go train there.
Yep, roger that.
All right. We've mentioned a couple of different social media outlets. We have Facebook, YouTube, and if you want to listen to us on our app, type in BjjBrick wherever you download apps, and we'll pop right up, and you can download the show through the app if that makes it easier for you. So good news is we'll be back within the week's time because we do 2 episodes the first week. So stay sweaty, my friends.
And don't forget to shower.
Train hard, train smart, get better, guys. We'll see you on the mats.
Thank you for listening. I hope you find the time today to roll. After all, the best way to get better at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.